I'd like to start off with just an introduction with the next presenter here in regards to when is reclamation success achieved, the influence of seed mix selection. So this presentation is going to be conducted by a gentleman named Woosaree. His research focuses on the revegetation, reclamation and restoration of disturbed habitats, and native seed collection, propagation studies, agronomy of native species, production of ecological varieties, and reintroduction of plants for various end land uses.
Thank you, Ryan. We use the tools and apply it to a site, and then see is this success or if it's not, and if it is, how is it achieved so that people can use it. So I will go through introduction, and then later there's a few tables based on natural infill and desirable species and so on. And Marshall is going to explain that to you. Then see is this success or if it's not, and if it is, how is it achieved so that people can use it. So I will go through introduction, and then later there's a few tables based on natural infill and desirable species and so on. And Marshall is going to explain that to you through those tables, and then I will conclude. So everybody is familiar with the 95 criteria, how it was done, and so on. And then, of course, we got the new criteria which apply for science reclaim after 2010. And of course, now when you have to do reclamation, how can we best use those tools to assess success? I'm not going to go into the difference between the 95 and 2010. Basically, the 95 was more a qualitative assessment, but in 2010 we want to be more like self-audit type and also science-based, science-driven, ecology-driven, so that this way the result is justifiable and also it's repeatable. So this way, if everybody follow the same way, we can come and achieve some kind of same conclusion. But the new one, it includes more than just like a cover. It's based on ecological response and grazing response of a native plant community. And so our objective, to do that, to look at different seed mixes and different timelines, whether 3 years post-reclamation, 7 years, 10 years, 15 years, how long of a time does it need to have a site fully certified? Because at the end of the day, if you're one of the stakeholders, you want to be able to seek a reclamation certificate. So how do you go about getting a reclamation certificate? What is the timeline? Everybody, when we do reclamation, we have their own seed mixers, throw 10% of this, throw 2% of that. But there's different seed mixers lead to the same end results, or each of them have their own end results, So what works, and then pass information to the end users, so this way at least we know how certain things are done in the native grassland, and we can use that information to our advantage. My goal was not to compare whether a site is fail or pass, but basically what are the barriers to reclamation success? If there are some barriers, why does a site doesn't work, and then we can learn from that. So the methodology basically to meet with some of the SRD people and some of the industries people, try to tell them what I was trying to achieve. And then also when the criteria was released in June 2011, I want to be sure that I am on the same level as everybody else. I understood it the same way. So this way, this is how it works. And also then to find suitable sites. So Marshall and myself, we went to the training, we learned, try to grasp as much as we can, and also to look at the different sites right here, and then finally do the detailed site assessment. And we find out that 2 people is always better than 1, because one does the soils all the time, one does the vegetation. This way you can move along, eventually it will take 1 day to get a site done, but eventually, as you get better at it, it will take you can do 2 sites in a day. You become really efficient once you understand the records of observation, the tools, how it works, how you input your data, you overcome those initial difficulties. So just some of the definitions we have to deal with or to understand when you talk about the 2010 criteria, just structural layers, what does it mean? And of course, we have about 4 structural layers, and this represents the different plant types in your plant community. And as you move from one plant community to the next one, your layers will change. Because when, like if you have trees, for example, then your trees will be higher, when your shrubs will be level 2 and so on. But as you move from parkland to grassland to dry mix, so that will change too. And of course, if you want to know more about definitions, go and read the criteria. But anyway, what is desirable species? Same thing, like, it's assessed on the grazing response. And basically, like, some species will decrease. And if the other one, like for example, take your rough fescue, if you tend to graze it more, then, the importance of fescue will go down. You will have more of an increases, such as your June grass, your blue grama, which is okay. It's like it's a native infill, but it doesn't have the same end value. So again, this is just when you're working with the tools of observations, those are some of the stuff you have to be familiar with. So what did we find out? So some of the limitations to reclamation success, we found out that reclamation, there was some good work happening on those sites. But can we get better? Of course, we can do better. And most of the sites were major issues with weeds and noxious weeds. And sometimes noxious weed can be only like, one clump of tansy. And all you have to do if you're looking at the site, inspecting the site, all you have to do is pull that thing out and get rid of it, done. Your site will have passed. But because you get a clump of tansy, you cannot accept it, so you have to say it's not acceptable. So most of the sites we have to deal with problem weeds like brown grass or tansy or toad flax or Canada thistle. And a simple cosmetic application could solve the issue, but it's not being done. And because of that, you cannot say, okay, I will pass the site. So the judgment is just where you pass or fail, but in my case, I say, well, this is a barrier to reclamation. Whoever the consultant or applicator is, if you would have to follow a simple process, then you would have better end results. And so when you put your seed mix, like, Verizon, we talk about seed mix, because when the site is disturbed, the first thing we came to mind, we got to seed it to provide stabilization and so on. So when you have to put up your seeds, like basically, look at the seed mix in contamination, make sure there's no contamination, make sure your equipment is clean, and also like if there are like what I call like controlling infills, like those are the problem weeds or which is off-site, but like you have no control on when animals and wind and so on blow those propagules into your site, and as a result of that, next year or so you'll have little weed plants coming up. So you have to control it. If you control it from day one, then most likely you can have reclamation success much, much earlier. And this is an example we have. Like we have good layers, good structural layers. We got litter, good biomass, even in many cases, better under control. But nothing is done for weed management. This is, I can't remember the exact age of the site of post-reclamation, but we have toad flax, heaven everywhere. Like toad flax, toad flax, toad flax. Like what do? You got the salts, which is not bad. You got the litter decomposition, which is very important with recycling. You got the structural layers, you got the desirable species. But simple like that, what you could do now, like is spray for the control of toad flax, and then in a year, you can apply for REC certificate, because you have to wait about a year. So simple things like that, where a site could have, you could have seek a certification, now it's all delayed, or you cannot because there's no management control. The other limitation we found was the structural layers. The structural layers is important to get the different desirable species onto your site. And one way that can happen is through native infill coming into. And it should be no more than 15% of your control. But from most of the sites, we have like free and open fescue and so on. Those are about 3 years post-reclamation. And when you look at the site after 3 years after reclamation, no, it cannot be certified. It's too early because, one thing, you don't have the quality of litter. You're limited by that. You want litter which is not only quantity, but also good decomposition. And so you don't have that. So 3 years is too early. Most likely in about 5 years, you can have some nutrient cycling and so on go on, like more desirable species coming in. Because native infill takes time to colonize the site, and the only way you can improve that is that when you put your seed mix together, have your seed mix represented by different structural layers. Also, you can have some foams in it if you want. This way, you can simply try to build up layers, and you can improve that. And Again, as you move from parkland to driveways and so on, the structural layers will differ. So when you look at one example like this one is like, this is the site, well, this site is all seeded to one structural layer. Whereas if with the control, you could see even in the picture in October, it looks way different because you get the different shrubby, tall grasses, like sandweed and so on. Whereas look at here, it's only one structural layer. And then if you take a closer look, you could see the bare ground. There's much more space among bare ground. So the site not only does it pass on structural layers, it doesn't also pass on bare ground. And yet when you look at the background of the site, what was seeded there, it doesn't match to what's happening on the site. So apparently, the seed companies scoop everything there, put it, give you a nice seed mix, all what's there, and you just don't seed it, but you don't get all the species to come up. So you have to be very, very vigilant as what's coming in, what you're purchasing, what you're putting into the ground. Because apparently when you look at the documents here, and you look at the thing here, it doesn't match. Because now you're only one structural layer. Yes, you have cover, but it's not the type of cover you want. And this site, like even after about 5 years, you cannot certify a site like that. So yet if you have put the right species, get the right composition and so on, then the time will be much less. You could easily apply for reclamation certificate. And also, like in this case, you can say, yeah, what you're doing, you're setting up yourself for long-term failure. You have short-term success because you got your cover and so on, but in the long term, it will cost you more because this site definitely will not pass. So as a result of sort of one structural layer, what you should be aiming for have 2 to 3 structural layers in your plant community, but most likely it will resemble to what it was prior to disturbance. This is a site in southern Alberta. The challenging there, good use of native species. You got the nice structural layer. This is all native, but this is in the eastern district, irrigation district. For some reason, they have a lacy wine and seed alfalfa, so that the cattle, the livestock grazing there will have alfalfa. So now what's happening, alfalfa is moving into the site here. Although after about 4 years, that site could be ready for certification, now it can't be. Apparently, one person is not talking to the next person, different goals, different values. So those are things like, which limit reclamation success. Also about the quality of litter. Like in this case, we have comparable amount of litter compared to the control, but the quality is not there. The quality of litter is very important. It indicates nutrient cycling, and you have to be sure that the quality litter is there in order to get reclamation success. You cannot just have a site with nice grasses, but no nutrient cycling, no decomposition. So those are very important. And we look at some sites which are like 15 years old, and again, like these are like end of September, October, and these sites are really good. Like you won't be able to tell the difference between what the off-sites and the on-sites. Even for sites where have been reclaimed like 15 years ago, we did pretty good reclamation. It just maybe perhaps they have more time for infill species to come in, and that's why. But the decomposition, the soil quality, and so on, we have no issues with that. And with that, I will leave it to Marshall to explain a few of those infills and desirable species.
Thank you, Jay. Okay, so let's talk about seeded species. This table is an amalgamation of all the seed mixes on the sites that were used on the sites that we visited. So as you can see, there's a few species that are used by and large the most for seed mixes in Alberta. Same list, just our pink coloring would just kind of annotate the ones that are used most frequently. Anything maybe below those would be special use or special ecosite. So what I want you to look at is the yellow highlighting, and that column is structural layers. So those species that are used in seed mixes are predominantly one structural layer, according to the record of observations, right? And the 2010 criteria. So you see that the Stipa viridula and the Festuca halii are the two, or structural layer 2. And I just want you to think about what percentages of a seed mix those two would be. And just so you know that these seed mixes are mostly seeding one structural layer for the most part. Okay. Next one. I suppose I could say something about Festuca ovina being in the structural layer. Actually, if you look in the grazing response column in the green highlight, this species was seeded, but it has no value in the 2010 criteria because it's an invader as a grazing response 3. So it doesn't assist for cover or for structural layers. Okay, so up in the grazing response column, June grass and blue grama grass are considered class 4 grazing response. So depending on your control when you're seeding a site, if you have a lot of these in your control, then it's fine to use a lot of them in your seed mix. But you don't want your lease to be higher in populations of these species than your control is. So you have to seed carefully. Use them with caution, according to your control. Okay. So the next table, an average of 2.4 structural layers on our controls. So we figured you've got to aim when you're seeding for at least 2 structural layers. So one would assume that would be 50% of your seed mix as structural layer, say 2, and structural layer 3. Okay, so this table is actually species availability, commercially available seed that you can buy to put into a seed mix. So if you take a look at this list and you know your species, then you probably know that most of the species that you're going to want to use are in the Central Parkland region. Sorry, these tables are all based on the Central Parkland region. They're mostly class 3 structural layers. So you have those structural layers, those species to use to add structural layers. But you're not probably going to see tufted hairgrass anywhere that is an upland site anyway. And for the most part, we know that Festuca campestris and Festuca halii, when you seed them, they're going to come into the community, but it's not going to be by the time you want to get a certification. So you can seed them, that's great, they'll be in the seed bank, but they may not show in any high percentages for over 5 years. Oh, wow. Okay. So running along. This is a benchmark site for delusion lakes. So this is what's found out there, and it's a good way to base your base seed mixes off, because this is what's in the natural system, right? Notice that there's 89.9% cover in the area, and all the highlighted seeded species are what is available commercially. That makes up 25.8% of this community. So you're not going to be able to seed what's there, and it's not going to come back to what's there until natural infill occurs. Suggested seed mix that could be used, the pink is an introduction of acceptable substitution species that are available commercially, that are of different structural layers, that you also have to be careful adding them into a mix, because you have to, for the delusion lakes, it would actually be okay to add, because you have 18.7, I didn't put it in here, but the Carex is a class 4 grazing response. So it does give you a little bit of leeway. So just know that when you're adding those in, that it's going to be, you have to base it off your control, but it would add structural layers. Some other additional species you could think about. Shrubs are all class 1. If you have any questions, please afterwards.
Sure. I'll just finish pretty fast. But when you look at reclamation success, like, to ensure proper trajectory, make sure like your site is like, do that little cosmetic thing, get rid of some of those noxious weeds, problem weeds, fix it as early as you can prior to the problem getting worse and worse, after a few years. And also try to look more at the structural layers, like don't hesitate to try to use some forbs. And here we're talking here about seed mixers, but if you have an area where you have native hay, you have access to native hay, like clean, like no problem weeds and so on, don't hesitate, don't shy away. Like, if you get permission, use some of that and try to work it in. But might be, good example of, approximate your control. Again, I talk about forbs and shrubs. That's some ways to look at to speed up the process of seeking a reclamation certificate. Or one more thing too, like usually the natural way around the site, we put that fence, like if you have good vegetation cover, good site stabilization, maybe after about 3-4 years, we should start to think about take that fence down a little bit, get some grazing to come either from wildlife or from livestock. This way, when that happens, it opens up the plant canopy, get some decomposition of litter to start occurring on that site, encourage natural infill to come into the site. So those are some of the practices that you can do to improve or to expedite reclamation, in order to allow you to get a reclamation certificate. Rather than just put a fence and walk away, then come back 6-10 years later, say, can we pass this site or not? So those are some of our practices we should look at. And and one way too, like, have a properly designed seed mix too, like, don't just go for the cheapest one, slender wheatgrass, Rocky Mountain fescue, whatever. Try to have your seed mix represented by your different structural layers. With that, I would like to thank AUPRF and SRD, especially as board, and GNLG and so on, for supporting this project. And I still have to write the report, so you will see that later too. So with that, I'll say thank you for listening to me.
Everyone, I think we do have time for maybe one or two questions if you do have them for Jay or Marshall.
Sure.
I was just wondering if lowering your seed mixes in native prairie, is that something that helps add the infill species in as opposed to traditionally heavy seeding rates?
It depends on your surroundings. Yeah. If your surroundings, you have like the brown grass, is a threat and so on, then you may want to go with a higher density, like, just to keep the competition away. Mind you, because like over they will compete for nutrients and so on. So it's based compared to your control. And one thing about you do when you put your seed mixers, if you don't know what species are there in your control and so on, look at some SRD benchmark sites. SRD has beautiful documents on their website. It's good to refer to. So look at some of the SRD benchmark, and then you know exactly what species are there, what are some of the problems there on the site and so on, and use that, approximately adapt it to suit your need. Hope it helps. And you can always call me. I take that too.